that, I'll introduce today's moderator, Molly Peace. Molly is the Managing Director and Chief Compliance Officer at Curium Capital. She leads the day-to-day operations of Curium with a particular focus on sourcing, underwriting, and monitoring the firm's investments. You can find her bio along with our panelists' bios up top by clicking on the View Schedule link. It's all yours, Molly. Good luck, and I'll see you guys all later in the event.
Thanks so much, Wendy, and thanks to Dealmakers for co-hosting with Wolf today. We have a really outstanding panel, and we're going to have a great discussion, so thanks to everyone for joining us. I'd like to introduce our panel. First, we have Roberta Liebenberg, who's a senior partner at Fine Kaplan & Black, where she concentrates her practice on class actions, antitrust, and complex commercial litigation. Bobby has been appointed by courts to represent plaintiff classes in many class actions and also defends Fortune 500 companies. She's a principal in the Red B Group, a woman-owned consulting group which assists companies and law firms to develop leadership and organizational excellence. Bobby's also co-authored a number of groundbreaking studies to help address gender disparities impacting women lawyers. Next, please meet Nicole Galley, who's the founder and managing member of ND Galley Law, LLC, an intellectual property-focused boutique law firm located in Philadelphia and New York. Throughout her career, Nicole has assisted clients seeking litigation funding, has represented non-practicing entities in patent litigation, and currently serves as counsel for a litigation funder with respect to intellectual property matters. Nicole is also an equity project champion for Burford Capital's Equity Project and is a founding partner of the Du Jour Empowerment Fund, which focuses on funding smaller cases brought by women-owned firms and women litigators. Finally, Nicole is also a founder and president of Women-Owned Law, WAL, which is the first national organization dedicated to empowering, supporting, and advancing women entrepreneurs in the law. And finally, we have Wendy Childress, who is a former trial lawyer who joined Validity Finance as portfolio counsel in 2019. Validity's team is women-led, with over 50% of its investment team being women, including senior management. Before joining Validity, Wendy practiced commercial litigation for 17 years at Yetter Coleman in Houston, where her practice focused on representing plaintiffs and defendants in complex business and bet-the-company disputes. And there she served for over 10 years on the Women's Leadership Committee and has brought that experience to Validity, where she has focused on promoting women and DEI initiatives. So we have some successful, accomplished, and empowering women on the panel today. The title of our presentation is Advancing Women Leaders in Law, Trends, Challenges, and Solutions. Following along with that title, we're going to start with a discussion of some trends in the legal industry. Bobby, I'll hand it off to you, and you can introduce us to some of the trends that you've studied and seen yourself.
Thanks, Molly. And if you could turn up the PowerPoint, if you could put that on to share the screen. Great. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. So as mentioned in the introduction, I am a principal in the Red B Group. And with the ABA, we conducted one of the largest national studies of the impact of the pandemic on the legal profession, with over 4,200 ABA member respondents. And so this translated into a representative sample of thousands of lawyers from all geographic areas, practice settings, ages, race and ethnicity, gender identity, disability, and household composition. If you haven't seen this report, on this slide is the link in which you can download it for free. It not only sets forth our findings, but also data-based best practices and strategies for legal organizations and individual lawyers. Next slide. So Stephanie Scharf, who is also a principal in the Red B, we conducted a research study of why experienced women lawyers, so lawyers who've been practicing 15 plus years, disproportionately were leaving the profession at greater numbers. Everyone seems to think that women leave the profession at childbearing age, but actually our data showed that the largest stampede out of the legal profession was at age 50, when women should have been at the top of their compensation and leadership positions. And the number one reason as to why experienced women lawyers reported that they were leaving the legal profession was caretaking commitments, as you can see from this slide, 58%. 54% of experienced women lawyers said that they were primarily responsible for childcare, compared to just 1% of men. And I want you to think about this, because this is the status of what women had to deal with pre-pandemic. Next slide. Now, as we went into the pandemic, all lawyers experienced a seismic change in the practice of law, but there was a disproportionate burden with respect to women lawyers, and particularly women lawyers with children and lawyers of color, as I will talk about in a few minutes. But women lawyers with children, you can see some similarities between men and women, but if you look at some of these bullets, you can see a real disparity. So 63% of women found it was hard to keep home and work separate. 60% felt overwhelmed with all the things that they had to do. 57% were having trouble taking time off from work, and 57% also thinking their day would never end. And as a result of this, it was not surprising that 52% of women were experiencing stress at work. Next slide, please. And if you look at this slide, it shows a breakout in terms of how women were experiencing stress totally on account of their gender. And this had to do, again, with the fact that their workday was more easily disrupted than their male colleagues. They had more responsibility for in-person school, for elder care, for other child care responsibilities than men. Next slide. And so given these statistics, it was not surprising that women lawyers in general were more anxious and stressed about their compensation, about their advancement, and whether or not they would be furloughed or laid off. There was also a distinction with respect to women with children, with the age of the child having more significance on the response. So women with children were more stressed about the fact that they were being overlooked for assignments or important matters, and that they were perceived to be less committed to their law firm or legal employer. And again, hearkening back to that walking out the door study, we found during that research that, again, pre-pandemic, 63% of experienced women lawyers were perceived to be not as committed to their law firm compared to 2% of men, and having 2 or more children increased that misperception about their commitment, ambition, and dedication to their firm. And clearly, during the pandemic, you're seeing once again that these misperceptions about dedication and commitment are much more are increased with respect to women and not with men. So given this data, it was very disturbing that we found that 53% of women with children ages 5 or younger were thinking about working part-time. 41% of women with children ages 6 to 13 also considering working part-time, and 37% of women lawyer respondents reported that they felt it would be better not to work at all. And our findings are consistent with a 2020 Mckinsey Lean In Women in the Workplace survey, which found that 1 in 4 women in corporate America were thinking about either downsizing their career or leaving the workplace altogether, and what the impact of that would be in terms of women's leadership if we see this exodus of talent. Next slide. In addition, we wanted to focus on issues relating to DEI, given the congruence of the pandemic, as well as the refocus on issues with respect to social and racial justice. And again, some very disturbing results. 47% of lawyers of color said that they were experiencing stress at work solely on account of race or ethnicity, compared to white lawyers, 7% of white lawyers. We also found that 54% of women lawyers of color were experiencing stress at work because of this intersection of race or ethnicity and gender, as compared to 6% of white women and 41% of men of color. Next slide. So in addition, we surveyed ABA members to find out, as we emerged from the pandemic, what were the types of resources that they were looking for. And you can see that 67% of women and 70% of women with dependent children wanted more comprehensive plans for sick leave and family leave, adding more days to personal time off, more months to paid parental leave to fill in childcare gaps, and more resources with respect to wellness, which has become a huge issue, and one that Stephanie and I are doing research about, the increased rise of burnout, especially for women lawyers and lawyers of color. So it is clear, last slide, that legal employers are going to need to be laser focused as we emerge from the pandemic, whether or not they really will accept hybrid remote work, which will provide meaningful opportunities and pathways forward for women lawyers and lawyers of color. Molly, turn on your mic.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Bobby. Thank you so much for that presentation. It's a fascinating study, and some of the results are both eye-opening and also pretty concerning. There's definitely a lot to unpack there. I know, Wendy, you've spent some time thinking about pay equity, which is one of the issues that has come up in these studies and is a significant challenge for female advancement in the legal industry. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you've understood the challenges to be in pay equity and some thoughts on how that could potentially be improved?
Sure. You know, one thing I think is so interesting is that there is this misconception that women are leaving the workforce and the legal field at childbearing age. And so why is it that after 15 plus years of practice, women are leaving? And it's obviously a very stressful profession, and women are often juggling so much, and perhaps more than their male counterparts. And studies show that one of the factors that contributes to women leaving is the fact that they are not being compensated enough to account for all of that stress and that they're juggling. And so, you know, we all know that pay equity continues to be an issue, both in the legal profession and beyond. And Major Lindsay in Africa has continually surveyed this issue, or conducted surveys to look at the issue. And sure enough, it remains true that male partners' average compensation is still significantly outpacing female partners. The average compensation for a male in the 2020 study was $1.13 million, whereas for females it was $784,000. And that's something, that gap in compensation is only going to widen, we suspect, because of all the pressures that have occurred during the pandemic and the hard choices that women are having to make. And so why is that? We're talking about accomplished women who are obviously tenured and have spent quite a bit of time practicing. So why are these pay gaps there? And they're largely due to two issues. One is partner originations. Partner pay is often calculated based on the amount of originations that the attorney is making in any given year. And the second is partner profitability. And so how does litigation finance fit into this? And at a high level, I would just say that litigation finance can provide opportunities for partners who are open to them to both enhance client development, work with clients, and then also enhance profitability. The ways that it does that in terms of originations is that, and I'll just take a step back. Women leaders are often advising women attorneys and firms, women partners, to step outside of their comfort zone. We need to get out. Women might tend to fall into a more, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to put my head down and do my job, and that's how I'm going to be rewarded. And really, women leaders and those who've achieved success say you really need to step out of that. You need to think creatively, and you need to focus on financial metrics and increasing originations, and not just your hard work. So how does litigation finance fit into that? Well, your clients right now are suffering. So firms have fared better in the pandemic than we originally thought, but your clients have not. And there was a recent study done by Altman Weil where they surveyed over 100 law departments, and general counsel just consistently said they're under tremendous pressure to cut costs. 44% of those surveyed said we're going to cut our legal budgets in 2021. 33% reported asking their firms for discounts because of COVID. So if you're a woman partner in a firm, or you have your own firm, knowing this pain point for your clients and having a tool to come in and solve it for them is something that will really help them, and it will help you in terms of your own metrics in terms of origination and profitability. You can come in and talk to your clients about their budgets and say, we have this tool, litigation finance. This is where a capital provider can come in and partner with us to provide all or part of the fees that it's going to take to bring your cases to trial. And they can cover your costs as well. So we can take that legal spend and remove it out of your budget. And this is non-recourse funding. So if the case is not successful, you are not going to owe the funder their principal or a return. If the case is successful, a portion of those proceeds will come out to pay the funder back. I, as your lawyer, am essentially offering you a package where I'm taking your case on a contingency and your costs are covered. And we have a partner who will come in and mitigate that risk for us, and then only recover if your case is successful. And I'm going to go make sure that your case is successful. So your clients are happy. And so what this does in terms of origination is it provides you a way to get in front of your client and offer a solution about a pain point that they're really experiencing. It's also an underutilized tool. We've done surveys, and while there are many corporate legal departments that are interested in litigation finance, it's still very underutilized. And so you're able to provide what may be a new creative solution to a very real problem. That's going to increase your origination. And then in terms of your firm, it's enabling you to increase profitability, because perhaps that client is now going to bring an affirmative claim that they might have been reluctant to bring before, or they're going to bring the claim and you're going to be able to share in the upside of that claim when you successfully litigate it. You're also telling your firm, we're going to take this case, our client is very happy, but we're going to recover a portion of my fees along the way. So rather than I've taken this case on a full contingency and assumed all of the risk for myself and the firm, we're getting a steady stream of fees paid as they're incurred throughout the life of the case. And so even if the case is unsuccessful, we will have been paid that portion of the fees. And if the case is successful, we also share in the upside just as though we were on a contingency. And so we've mitigated that risk. Another point on profitability is that you're really ensuring a steady realization rate. When you're working with funders that you can trust and a good funder, you're going to be having those fees paid back to you on a regular basis. You're not chasing the client down. You're not having to write off bills. You're able to ensure that steady revenue stream. And studies have shown that alongside originations, profitability is very much a metric that firms are looking at. and they're very much paying attention to your realization rates. And so these are really two avenues in which you can promote yourself and maybe open up the door to having that higher compensation or promotion to equity partner, which you might otherwise be struggling to achieve.
Thanks, Wendy. And I think in addition to what you've discussed in terms of relatively senior women in a firm trying to establish themselves and potentially advance to equity partner, there's also a benefit of litigation finance when it comes to women who potentially want to go out on their own and start their own firm. And a lot of the challenge or the risk of doing that is making sure that you have the capital and the financial backing to be able to afford to go out on your own and start your own firm. And that's certainly an option for women as well, is to do that and go down more of the entrepreneurial path. So Nicole, I know being the founder and president of WAL and your own personal experience, you've certainly encountered a lot of women who've gone down the path of entrepreneurship. Talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges of doing that, how some of the trends Bobby was discussing impact a decision to do that, and maybe also how litigation finance can help with the decision to start your own firm and have the financial wherewithal to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So, what I'd like to do is start out by focusing on the parts of the data in one of the very early slides of why women are walking out the door around 50. But the part that, gets a lot of focus and did today, because obviously it's extraordinarily important, especially with the pandemic, is that top line reason of, for caretaking reasons. Now, put your mindset around a woman around 50, may or may not be having small children at home. So that mindset needs to go out the door. In my case, and I had my kids quite late, I was already a partner at Pepper at the time when they were born, they were teenagers or close to it by the time I made the decision around 50 to leave, big law overall. But I was behind many of my peers. I mean, many of the folks that I know who are my contemporaries, they already, they were long past having their kids off in college and beyond. So, more likely what is caretaking there could be older parents. It could be a lot of things. But what I really think we need to focus on is all the other reasons, because at the end of the day, that's what matters, not the caretaking. I mean, yeah, that's important. That's a big issue. But frankly, I've never worked as hard as I have since I've had my own firm. So if anything, my caretaking is even more challenged right now, juggling effectively through businesses. But what is it really going on? If you're getting, as Wendy pointed out so eloquently, if you're adequately being compensated, if you're achieving equity partner, if you're having a real seat at the table, not just the token woman that gets put on the management committee, but then nobody wants to hear from her. And that is a real story from a very senior woman who left one of the large firms, had been on the management committee. And the reason she gave is, I got there and I realized no one really wanted to hear what I had to say. She went out, she started her own firm, had it very successfully for over 10 years and retired from it. Brought her daughter in actually to be part of her firm. So why are women really leaving? In part, maybe it's caretaking, but hello, if we were there for 20 years, we figured a lot of that out. It's really these other reasons. So then what do? For some of it said, you know what, I'll just go do it myself. I'll do it better. And I know many women who, once they left, they were able to keep more of the money. They were able to make decisions about things like, are you going to be able to take litigation funding? Because that can be a really hard sell in firms, especially if you're not the right person who already has that seat at the table, who can influence that decision. It's not for everybody. And so you can make better choices when you're on your own. You can define the types of cases you want. A lot of firms still won't work on contingency, or maybe they'll accept it again for certain types of cases and not others. But let's also look at the fact that the profession isn't just big law. When you step off that path, as I have, the vast majority of attorneys in this country are not in big law, never have been. And so start looking at other things like a firm like Bobby's and her path. And she's had a path in a number of places, including having her own firm, one of the first folks, at least in Philly, to do that of a practice like ours. But say you're doing complex antitrust cases, as Bobby does, or other class action matters. that requires extensive capital. And even if you're at a plaintiff side firm, if you don't have that capital already, you got to find it somewhere. So honestly, for me, and that's part of why we started the De Jure Empowerment Fund in conjunction with my colleagues, is because it's really necessary, and it may not be available if you're starting your own firm or you're just starting out. You may not get the cases that, some of the premier funders that are really targeting, the cases from Fortune 500 companies, those, $5-10 million and up, $2 to $5-10 million and up investments. You have to start someplace. And so where do you start? So that's what we're focused on. And when you look at it, like any business, when you start, you need access to capital. That's really hard. We don't have widgets. You may not have a book of business, especially if you're on plaintiff side. You may have a very long horizon before you anticipate seeing revenue come in if you're doing a traditional method, of contingency fee work. So I really think that not only for advancement within big law, but really just advancement generally within the profession, looking at ways, follow the money, look at ways that you can fund what it is that you want to do, and realize that you have a lot of options. And litigation funding provides one more tool, no matter where you end up practicing, if you're in private practice.
Thanks, Nicole. I think that's 100% right. It's very interesting. And I think there's probably a lot of people who still need to understand that that's an option out there. And, the De Jure Empowerment Fund that you're working with is something that I'm sure many people hadn't heard about, but it's really important to know that that's something that can help support people that are starting out and have smaller needs than some of the bigger funders and what they do. So one of the things that you mentioned, Nicole, that I'm curious to get everyone's thoughts on. Certainly, I think people are thinking a lot about work-life balance and hybrid work and what's coming out of the pandemic and what's the future going to look like. And I think this matters for people, whether they're in big law or in their own firm and want flexibility or whatever it is. So I'm curious to hear all your thoughts on your predictions for the future, what you see happening as we hopefully continue to come out of the pandemic. And I also, before we get started, and maybe as everyone is giving their thoughts, we're going to do a poll of the audience to get a sense of what people expect to see for themselves personally, as many people tend to reopen in the fall. So Wendy, I think, is going to put a poll up on the screen for everyone in the audience to be able to answer the question. I think if you click on the poll tab in the top right corner of your screen for everyone in the audience, you should be able to select what you expect to be doing in the fall, whether that's working full-time in the office, working some sort of hybrid schedule in the office and remote, or remote work only. So as we're tallying up the votes for that and getting a sense of what our audience is expecting to do, would any of you like to talk a little bit about what your thoughts are in the future in terms of whether hybrid work is here to stay? Bobby, it looks like you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I'm actually writing an article about this. Will hybrid work be mere hype, or really will it be meaningful change for all lawyers, but particularly women lawyers? And I think it's important, again, to go back pre-pandemic. 96% of all legal organizations offered part-time, flex time, some kind of policy. Only 6 to 7% of lawyers took that. And of that 6 to 7%, 2/3 of them were women. So I think one of the research projects that Stephanie Scharf and I are going to continue to look at is actually what is going to happen. Are we going to see, again, a gender divide in terms of the fact that only women will be taking hybrid remote work? And I think it's important to underscore this, that the data from our Practice Forward survey found a gender and generational divide. So more senior male lawyers were interested in going back to work. More women lawyers with children were concerned about schools not back in session. Their kids aren't all vaccinated. Their colleagues may not be following COVID requirements, and they're concerned about that. And I just want to emphasize something that Nicole said, and that also came out of our walking out the door. Compensation was the death by 1,000 cuts that motivated women to leave. It wasn't just childcare commitments, that's what they said. But compensation, the failure to get compensation, the failure to have equal access to business development, the failure to have sponsors and mentors, where, as I said, sort of this culmination of I've had enough and I'm not going to do that. And they're not leaving the legal profession. They're following Nicole. They're following me, who I left Big Law at age 50. And as we started this research, it was incredible to find how many women were leaving to start their own law firms at age 50. So it's an interesting phenomena. But I think we have to be very, very vigilant about remote work. You're already seeing law firm leaders, primarily men, saying, yes, we tout hybrid work, but we strongly encourage that everyone will be in the office. And that sends a signal, a mixed signal, that in fact, if you're going to advance, if you're going to be promoted, you need to be in the office. And one last thought, even pre-pandemic, women did not have access to all of these great things that lawyers are touting about their culture and why they need to be back in the office. And I think those law firms, like Women-Owned Law, who are really innovative and creative, will have real recruitment possibilities to attract really diverse women and lawyer of color talent.
If I could comment, there's actually some research that I remember seeing. Unfortunately, I can't put my fingers on exactly where it is, but there are some studies that were done long before the pandemic looking at how women fared in virtual companies, right? So where the companies were all virtual, and it showed that, and this was because it had to do with some women leaders of virtual companies. And what it did show is that in those companies, women were much more likely to have, achieved leadership positions and sort of have more parity. I'll have to go dig out the research now that I just thought about it and put it together. And Bobby, I think it might be interesting for you to take a look at, particularly with your work, because I think if you can look at that, and if we can really get firms to embrace this concept. I mean, I have to tell you, most of the women-owned law firms I know, even if we're more than one attorney, I was kind of unusual, at least for a big law type practice, to have a physical bricks and mortar office for any length of time. I did for the first 5 years of the firm until the pandemic hit, but honestly, clients never came to it. My clients are all over the country, and my cases are all over the country. I don't even know why I had it. I mean, I do know why I had it, but there are many firms. You look at a Culhane Meadows, largest women-owned firm in the country, or one of them anyway. That's a very virtual model. So if you really start looking at it, I actually think it's a strength, and I think that the organizations that embrace it are going to benefit from it, because they're going to find women are more able to advance and succeed in those organizations.
It's also interesting, and I think that's fascinating about the study you're talking about with the remote work only and how that impacts female advancement. It's really interesting. We could talk about these issues all day. There's so much more to discuss, but I know our time is ticking and we have some questions, so we may need to get to some Q&A. But before we do that, I don't know if everyone can see it on the screen, but the results of our poll, 0% of people expect to be back in the office full-time come fall, which it's interesting whether that's impacted at all by the composition of the audience today, or whether that would hold true with a broader group as well. But about 2/3 expect to be back on a hybrid schedule, and 1/3 remote only. So interesting. We'll see how that turns out, where we are a year from now. We have a question from someone in the audience who I believe has also raised their hand. So we'll try this out and see if this works. I'll try to hand the mic over, and maybe we can hear the question live. Otherwise, I can read the question. And I guess just before we get to that, for everyone in the audience, there's 2 ways to raise questions. If you see on the top of your screen, on the top right corner, there's a Q&A button. You can type questions into there. Use that Q&A button rather than chat button, and then I can read those questions aloud. Or if you'd like to raise your hand and come up onto the stage and ask your question yourself, you can do that on the raised hands tab, and just click on that, and then I can call you to the stage. So let me try to hand the mic over now to Jizwan Wang, And let's see if we can get her to ask her question.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you. Oh, did we lose you?
Hi, can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
Hi, so I actually was going to ask another question, which was,
Yes.
do you feel like there are some benefits of the pandemic happening? Because at least anecdotally, I've heard from lots of senior leaders who are lawyers in these firms say that because they're able to work from home, they're actually able to go, they have more opportunities with business development, or especially if they have a husband or a partner, they're able to help with the childcare. What benefits do you think there are, and if they'll continue and actually benefit women?
Thank you. Great questions. Does anyone want to take that one?
Well, I can tell you from our study that there are many benefits from the pandemic, which we hope do get normalized into hybrid work. But many, especially mid-level associates, said that on Zoom, they actually got to participate in client meetings. They weren't at the end of the conference table where they could never participate, but their square was exactly, they were able to contribute. And because of cost savings, they were also taken to these meetings, which when you were in person, many times because of travel or other costs, they weren't. So to me, I'm hoping to see that this continues so that you'll have the type of training and business development opportunities where the client can actually see you adding value to a meeting, and hopefully that will continue.
I think the pandemic was also helpful in terms of business development in that people were very willing to just jump on a Zoom and have a 20-minute, 30-minute conversation. And in some ways that was less intrusive than we're gonna meet and we're gonna go to lunch and it's gonna take an hour and a half out of your day. It was just 20 minutes. And so I found that to be really helpful. And I also agree that to the extent that you have a male partner who is helping share in your household duties and with your children, I think that was a real benefit. And obviously that varies from household to household, but it's a larger conversation in that being, a key component to helping achieve, women achieve leadership roles. But I think it was definitely something that a lot of families saw during the pandemic.
I do also think it could hopefully help normalize more of the hybrid work. I can't remember if it was Nicole or Bobby who mentioned about how few people were using law firms' flexible policies, and of the people who did use it, it was mostly women. If everyone's using flexible hybrid policies, it makes it easier for everyone else to do so as well. So hopefully that will normalize more of the hybrid work and remote work, and that makes it easier on everyone then going forward. So we'll have to see about that.
And hopefully male leaders need to take it, need to communicate support, and that's another part of our research. Will those who take remote, will they get promoted and advanced at the same rates? And what will happen?
Yeah.
I do think that generationally there is a shift though, because I just think about the individuals that I work with, and it is not unusual for me to hear from, and maybe it's just because they're comfortable telling me, I don't know, but to hear from young male partners or attorneys around that level, listen, I've got kid duty for the next 2 hours, and so in the evening, so I'll be back online after. That you would hear from the women in the past, wouldn't hear that as much. And I think it is a lot harder when they're home, right? So when the kid's off there screaming during the proverbial witching hour, you kind of need to shut off because it's not that quiet in a lot of houses. So whether that's going to keep up though, I do fear what Bobby had said, which is that any gains that we have or perceived gains, and I do think there were, to the extent that you don't have to spend an entire day traveling to go see a client for an hour-long meeting. Talk about a waste of time. That's a day away from your families. Whereas you just hop on a Zoom call, it makes it a lot easier to do more of those things. But I do worry that at least right now, it's going to turn into exactly what had said about the part-time. Only some people are doing it. And if you're really committed, you'll be back in the office, which is laughable because obviously everyone has been successfully doing their jobs all this time, even if it is at the expense of their mental and physical health, but that's another story. So, I think it really just shows how much people are willing to put themselves out for their jobs, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll let you come off the camera now. Thanks for coming up on stage. And if anyone else would like to come up on stage, feel free again to click the button on the raised hands tab, and we'd be happy to have you come up and chat with us. We had one other question, Bobby, that was following up on the study you talked about initially, where you said that women typically leave the legal industry around the age of 50. That was the trend. Do you have any information about the average age that men tend to leave the profession? And I am curious also, I've heard anecdotally that there have been some men who have different views about the profession after working from home through the pandemic and everything, and whether men are also leaving at different rates and impacted in any way by the pandemic. Any information or studies along those lines?
Sure. I'm a data geek. So, we have a wealth of studies. The Walking Out the Door study did find that women were disproportionately leaving the profession at much higher rates. So by age 50, women just comprised 27% of all lawyers in the legal profession. So a big disparity in terms of when men were leaving. We also found in the Practice Forward survey that there were lawyers, senior lawyers, that were actually pushed towards retirement earlier as a result of the pandemic. And that was something we had not seen as much in our data. One other thing I wanted to add to what Wendy said, and that is in terms of what else can assist women, and that is succession. All organizations should be thinking about succession, but 400,000 baby boomer lawyers are set to retire, if they ever do, in the next 10 years. And if you have women in terms of being in line for succession of the important clients and matters that they work on, we can create an entire new generation of rainmakers for those who stay in the firm and for those who want to leave and take clients with them and start their own law firms.
Thanks, Bobby. That's a really good point. We could go on and on asking you questions and picking your brain about all the different studies you've done, but I think we are now hitting the time point to move out into some breakout sessions and do some virtual networking. So I think I am going to thank all our panelists, Bobby, Nicole, and Wendy. This has been fascinating. I would be delighted to have lunch with each of you and continue these discussions. There's so much to talk about. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. And let's turn this back over to Wendy, and she will give us next steps onto how to select breakout rooms and continue the discussions.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you to our panelists, Bobby, Nicole, Wendy. Each of you guys are so inspiring. I just want to thank you on behalf of Dealmakers and Women in Litigation Finance for sharing your time, insights, and your expertise with us today. And thank you for the good work that you're doing. So I'm going to transition us to the lounge. I see some people logging off, but don't log off. There is a whole networking portion to follow, and this is really where we'll have the opportunity to connect with one another directly. When we get to the lounge, you'll see two options. One up top, you can speed network. There's our 3-minute speed meetings. Just, start networking. You click on that button to join those meetings, or you can join one of the table chats below. We have these set up where you can start off at your appropriate last name table, which are tables 1 to 5. And then if you'd like, you can move to any of the other topic or theme-based tables after that. So feel free to make your way around the lounge, get comfortable, say hello to one another. Just make sure that you have your audio and your video on for the best networking experience. And then just before we head over to the lounge, I just want to take one more moment to thank our speakers. Again, thank you guys so much for dedicating your time and your expertise. Really appreciate it. And also want to thank Women in Litigation Finance for collaborating with us on today's event. With that, I will transition us all to the lounge, and I'll wish you all a happy networking session. Thank you.